Hey, everybody. Good evening. It's Ellen Lewis from Crazy for You. And tonight I want to talk about knitting patterns and all the stuff that they don't tell you. If you're a newer knitter, a lot of times you'll look at a knitting pattern and you'll think, oh my gosh, this is another language. You know how to knit, you know how to purl, you know how to do all the things, but understanding that knitting pattern can stand between you and success. So, tonight I want to talk about some of the top things that newer and even some more experienced knitters find really, really confusing. So, I hope you enjoy it. And let me just say, you guys, that you were here early and kind of chatting before I went live. Thank you so much. That is so fun. It just makes it so nice for me to go live and to feel like, oh my gosh, you guys are all here and all as excited about seeing it as I'm excited about giving it to you. So thank you so much. So I did prepare a little presentation and I want to get that started, but I did want to say hi to everybody. So hey, Glenn. Hey, Amelia. Nice to see you guys. Polly, of course. Thank you for your comment on the blog, Polly. Hey, Arlene. Hey, I'm not sure who H. Thompson is, but hey. Hi, Gwen. Nice to see you. Hi, Suzanne. Yay. Hi, Colleen. Oh my goodness. Love to hear from you. I love to know that you're there. And I encourage you to go ahead and write in the chat if something that I am saying resonates with you, or if the way that I am explaining it doesn't quite get it. You don't quite get it still, and I'll be happy to go over it again. So, and if there's something that you're really anxious about and you're not sure that I'm going to cover it, go ahead and put that in that chat too. And if we have time, I will absolutely get to that as well. So we have a lot to cover tonight and I'm super excited. Like I said, I did make this little presentation. You know, I thought my PowerPoint days were over when I left corporate America, but apparently they are not. So this is much easier than it has been in the past. Okay. Hey, Susan. Hey, Phyllis. Hi, Barb. Hey, Patty and Sandy. Oh, it's so nice to see you guys. All right. So let's go ahead and get started. All right. So, yes. All right. What knitting patterns don't tell you? I'm going to give this full screen. Okay, knitting language and what they don't tell you. How many of you have had the experience where you've looked at a knitting pattern or you followed a knitting pattern exactly the way you thought it should be followed, but it really wasn't exactly right? I'm sure I can't be the only person that had that happen to them. So it's confusing. You know, you look at that and you're like, what do these things even mean? You know, what? Could you be more specific? Or as I always say, could you be any more vague? Right? So let's start at the very beginning, right side and wrong side. This is an abbreviation that you're going to see a lot, RS, WS, and right side. RS means right side, the public side. We often call it the public side. So if you're looking at a bit of stockinette fabric like this one in the picture, on the left, the knit side is the right side and the wrong side is the purl side. So if you put on a sweater in the morning and it's inside out, you know that you have the wrong side out and the right side in. But you want to be a little careful because the knit side is not always the right side. So I have this example here. Many of you have seen me wear this sweater many times. This is a beautiful cabled sweater, and you see that the knit side is the wrong side and the purl side is the right side. So we want to be careful using knit side and right side interchangeably because they're not. It's not always the knit side. So you see, here's a close-up. I prefer to think of it as the public side. So the public side is the one with all of the fancy stitch work where your seams look nice and even. Did everybody hear my puppy? And the private side is the side that is not going to be seen by the public. You see, you can't see that cable, and your seams are here, and your little pickup line at the top is visible. So even though this is the knit side, it is not the side that is going to be the right side during your knitting. Okay? So, where am I going? I thought I looked at that. I'm going the wrong way. Here we go. Okay, so what if both sides of the fabric are the same? And they are very often the same. So in moss stitch or double moss stitch, as this is, in garter stitch, and in ribbing, you can see that the front and back of the fabric look identical, right? So there isn't really a right side or a wrong side, is there? So it doesn't really matter which side you use, does it? Yes, it does. And you definitely want to mark your right side and your wrong side, even if they are the same, because it matters. Okay? Why does it matter? Well, typically, if you are making a garment or something that has shaping, you're going to want to know where to put your shaping. So a pattern is typically going to tell you where to begin. So if you're making a sweater, it's going to tell you for a particular piece, it's going to say, on your right side, bind off 3 stitches, or on your right side, begin decreases. Now, if you haven't identified which side of your fabric is the right side and which side is the wrong side, you will be making your bind offs, or you'll be beginning your decreases on the wrong side of the fabric, and then everything will get all turned around. You also want to be aware of what kind of shaping you're making. So certain decreases look better on the right side than the wrong side. So you want to make your decreases that lean in the direction of your shaping, but also that look nice on the right side. Okay, so knowing whether you're working on the right side or the wrong side of a fabric that doesn't have a stitch defined right side or wrong side is still kind of important. So if you know that you're working a pattern like that, after the first couple rows, and it's going to tell you which is the right side, which is the wrong side, go ahead and take a removable stitch marker and put it on your right side. And then make a note that the orange stitch marker means my right side. The other thing you want to know your right side from your wrong side, if you have a reversible fabric, is you want to seam it together properly. You want to make sure that you are seaming it so that the right sides are seamed together with the outside and that the seam is on the inside. Similarly, even if it's not seamed or it's not a garment, you still want to know which is intended to be the public side so that you can weave your ends in on the wrong side. A good weaving in of ends looks pretty good on the wrong side and perfect on the right side, but you want to make sure that you're weaving those in so that they are on the wrong side so that it looks perfect on the right side. Does it make sense? Okay, what do we got next? I think I had a question. Let's see. Make one with no indication of what type of make one to use is my bugaboo. Okay, we can maybe talk about that. And then I use the location of leftover long tail cast on, which is on the bottom right. Yes, it absolutely is. And that works great, Suzanne, if you're doing a long tail cast on. And if you're not casting on from 2 balls at the end of a row. So, but yes, I sometimes use that too. Hey, Terry. Okay, so let's back to this. So those are the reasons you would want to. So what does it mean? A lot of times your pattern will tell you end with a right side row or end with a wrong side row. So ending with a right side row means that you're ready to work a wrong side. Typically, what your pattern will tell you is to end with a wrong side row, which is this one. So when you've ended with a wrong side row, it means that you have worked a wrong side row and you are ready to make a knit row. Okay? Typically, you are going to see this because it's going to tell you the next row to begin your shaping. So because by convention, shaping begins on the right side. Okay, so this is a stockinette fabric, and the example that I've used here is ending with a wrong side row. Sometimes patterns will have you end with a right side row because they want you to place stitch markers when you're working your wrong side so that the stitch markers will be in place when you begin your next row, which will be the right side row, which is probably where you're going to begin your pattern stitch or your shaping. Does that make sense? All right. So another term that is very confusing is right front and left front, right back and left back. So let's talk about this a minute. When a pattern is referring to right front, left front, you're looking at it like I have in this example here. You know, you're looking at the fabric, but what they mean is what is going to be the right and left front of that garment as you wear it. Okay, so when you're looking at it, the left front is not the part of the front of the garment that's on the left-hand side. It's the part of the garment that's going to be on the left side of your body when you wear the garment. So that is this. So I have this sweater pinned down, and I show you that the left front of this is actually on the right side, and the right front is on the left side. Isn't that great and confusing? For the back, it's not so bad. When you have the right side of the back facing you, the left back is on the left and the right back is on the right. It's really on the front where it gets to be a little bit confusing. So that is something that it's just important to remember, that these references are to the garment as it's going to be worn. Okay, slipping stitches. How many of you have had some confusion about slipping stitches, whether they should be slipped knitwise or purlwise? I have this come up all the time in classes that I teach and various other things. People say, oh, well, it's a knit stitch, I'll slip it knitwise. Or do I slip it knitwise or purlwise? What about the purl stitches? Do they slip in the same way? And here is the simple answer. Unless otherwise directed, you always want to slip your stitches purlwise. Why is that? Okay, let me see if I made a thing for that. I didn't. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to actually show you on my camera here. Let me show you this picture here real quick so that you can see. I took a photograph and I want to show it to you. So when you slip a stitch knitwise, you're slipping it to change its orientation on the needle. When you slip it purlwise, you are just moving it over. So, like I said, let me show this on the camera. So here I have some stitches on my needle, and I want to slip them. But first, let's take a minute and look at them and see how they're seated on our needle. So this is what you call a stitch that's seated conventionally on your needle. You see the right leg of the stitch is over the front of the needle, and the left leg of the stitch is over the back of the needle. When we slip a stitch purlwise, we are basically moving that stitch from one needle to the next without changing the way the stitch is seated on the needle. You see that? So we're just moving it over. Slipping it purlwise is kind of the same thing as just sliding it over, okay? You're just sliding it over. On the other hand, when you slip a stitch knitwise, you're putting your needle in this way, and you're moving it, and you have changed the way that that stitch sits on your needle. Let me get this close up. Can you see that? So the stitch now sits backwards on the needle. A standard stitch mount, the stitch has its right leg over the front and its left leg over the back, but a stitch that has been slipped knitwise is seated in the opposite direction. All right, what difference does that make? Well, when you slip let's say you slipped your stitches to a stitch holder and you are going to come back to them later on. Can you see in this fabric, can you see this row of stitches right here that looks a little different from the others? Let me move this up a little bit. See if I can get my camera up a little bit too here. Yeah. Okay, so can you see that these stitches look different? They've been twisted. So when the stitch is seated the other way on your needle and you go to knit it, you are going to make a twisted stitch. And it's not a big deal. And, you have to look for it. But in a field of stockinette, you're definitely going to be able to see it. So when you are slipping your stitches just to a holder or something else, a piece of waste yarn, or you just have to unknit, or you have to take them off your needle for whatever reason, you always want to slip purlwise. All right? When you are slipping because you are doing a slip slip knit or a slip slip purl, you are slipping that stitch knitwise because you want to change the way that it is seated on your needle. You want it to be twisted, or you want it to be seated the other way, so that when you work them together through the back loop, it will untwist and lie open and flat in your resulting decrease. So unless it tells you otherwise, unless it specifically says slip a stitch knitwise, your default is to slip those stitches purlwise. Okay, and slipping the stitch knitwise or purlwise, like I said, has nothing to do with whether it's a knit stitch or a purl stitch. It's just about whether you want to maintain or change the way the stitch is seated on the needle. So I know that's something that comes up a lot. Okay, so another thing that comes up a lot is at the end of each row, or at each end of the row. So this is something that comes up when we are talking about shaping, or whether it's decreases or increases. Your pattern will your pattern will often say decrease one stitch at the beginning and end of the next 4 right side rows. Okay, so at each end, right? You knit the first 2 stitches together, you knit the last 2 stitches together. Or you know that you want to do a left leaning decrease at the beginning, so you slip, slip, knit those first 2 stitches together and you knit those last 2 stitches together. And that's fine if you're making a shawl or a scarf of some sort that has nothing to be picked up along the edge, or no side seams to be created. But if you plan to seam that garment, or if you plan to pick up along the edge of your shawl and work in the opposite direction, you want to put those decreases at least 1 stitch away from the edge. Okay? Because the knit 2 together messes with the place where you would put your seam. Okay? The same thing with a slip slip knit. You need that selvage stitch that remains undecreased to give you a nice place to put that. So let's look at what that looks like. So here is my fabric. I have another kind of close up for you here. Okay, so can you see my decreases here? My decreases here. I've done it 2 stitches away from the edge, And that leaves me with this nice clean spot right here where I can make my seam. If you were trying to seam something and you were coming up here along this nice clean line, all of a sudden that decrease would be in your way and it would be very unhappy. That's a lot of the times why people don't like to seam things, is because they've placed their decreases right at the edge, and then it makes it very hard to make that seam. So that's where I'm showing you. Can you all see that? I can also show you right here on the actual fabric that I took that that picture from. Let me show you here. Get this out of the way. Okay, let's look at this. Whoops. All right. Right here. So you can see my decreases, right? Can you see my decrease right there? And I would make a seam, or actually this is a neckline edge. I'm going to pick up from my neckline right here along this selvage stitch. And if I were trying to do that here, let's say I was trying to pick up here, I would come up and then I would come up to this decrease spot, which makes it awkward. And it ends up looking really messy. So it's always a good idea to make your decreases at least one stitch away from your edge. Okay, let's see. Something has happened to my thing here. Hang on just a second. Okay, here we go. All right, so that's the photograph that I took for you. Oh my goodness, it looks so like my actual camera. Okay, so another thing that's confusing is row repeats. While we're talking about decreases and where to place them, it's sometimes very confusing to understand what they mean by every row, every other row, every right side row, and all of these kinds of things, right? So let's look. Every row, that means literally every row, okay? It means that you'll do your decrease. Let's say you're doing an armhole decrease on a cardigan. You're going to do it on the knit side and you're going to do it on the purl side. So if you're doing a decrease on a cardigan on the left front, you're doing the armhole decreases, you are going to do a decrease at the beginning of the row, one stitch in, of course, the beginning of the knit row, and you're also going to be doing that decrease on the purl row. You'll be doing it at the end of the purl row, so that those decreases will happen every row for however many rows. So knit side decrease at the beginning of the row, purl side decrease at the end of the row, and repeat. All right, every right side row, okay, or every other row. I think every other row is what we often hear. I think every right side row is just a little more precise. You will hear it both ways. They mean the same thing because, as I said, the default, the typical way of doing decreases is that they begin on the right side. So every right side row means every right side row. It's every other row. So you work a right side row with a decrease and then you work across and you don't. Every other right side row, that's the same thing as every fourth row. So every other right side row would mean you would work a decrease on a right side, you would work a wrong side row, then you would work a right side row with no decreases, and then you would work a wrong side row, and then you would be on your fourth row, which would be your alternate right side row. That's where you would do your decrease. So I know it's a little confusing, but I have a little trick at the end that I will share with you and help you figure that all stuff out. Okay, sometimes, especially in European patterns, you will see something like every sixth row 5 times, or every alternate fourth and sixth row. That means, so every sixth row, excuse me, this is not making sense. You'll see every fourth and sixth row, or you'll see every sixth and eighth row, or every 10th and 12th row, okay? What that means is that you're going to do a decrease on the fourth row, and then you're going to do a decrease on the sixth row, or an increase, or whatever. Work your shaping. It doesn't mean do it on the fourth row and then do it again 2 rows later. Why they use this, and I know it's confusing, they do this when what they really want is a decrease on the fifth row, right? They want you to decrease on the fifth row, but the fifth row means that every other time it's going to be on a wrong side row. And that's just too confusing to explain. Do you know what I mean? In a pattern, because you'd have to do a different kind of decrease, and it's going to alternate every time. So if the math for the pattern comes out by the designer that they really need you to decrease every fifth row, or every third row, or every seventh row, sometimes it's easier to understand and probably easier for them to write if they say for the fifth row on the fourth and sixth alternate rows. So one time you're going to do it every 4 rows, the next time you're going to do it every 6 rows. Then you're going to go back to every 4 rows, and you're going to go back to every 6 rows. This is one thing that has caused so much confusion in so many patterns, especially those that come from European lines, because that's not the way it's done in the United States typically. So anyway, has anybody seen that? I know that we had that in the No Plain Jane cardigan, and that was a cause for great stress in many, many knitters. Okay, so another thing that is very stressful and confusing is at the same time. So 2 different kinds of shaping happening at the same time. It's typically a neckline and an armhole shaping, and it can be very confusing. That's what you see here. So this is a raglan sweater. It has a line of decreases at the armhole, and then as you can see, it has a line of decreases here at the neckline that happen at a completely different rate. And your pattern will say something like, begin your armhole, bind off, and then do your decreases. And then it'll say at the same time, when piece measures, or when however many decreases have been worked, begin your neckline shaping. And this is very stressful and very confusing for a lot of knitters. But what I like to do is I like to write it out. I like to address the shaping that comes first, track it all the way through. You can even write out the kinds of decreases that you want to do there. So I like to keep a notebook. I know a lot of knitters keep notebooks. This is what I think is the greatest thing. So if you're working your left front, let's say your first row is to bind off 5 stitches, and then it says, your pattern is probably going to say something like bind off 5 stitches at the beginning of the next 2 right side rows, then begin armhole decreasing, decrease every other row 3 times, then every 4th row 2 times. That's what this looks like. That's what happens here. So bind off 5 stitches, you're going to purl back, assuming we're working in stockinette, then you're going to bind off 2, then you're going to be on your right side again. You're going to do your armhole decreases, and then you're going to do it again on your next right side row, and then your next right side row. Then when you have every 4th row, 1, 2, 3, 4, boom, there's your decrease. 1, 2, 3, 4, there is your decrease. So get those all the way through. I know it says at the same time, but it is going to give you the complete set of instructions for the one decrease area. So let's say it starts with your armhole like this does. Work all the way through and write out all of your armhole decreases. Then look at your neckline decreases. It's probably going to say something like after, on 1, 2, 3. So 7 rows after begin your armhole shaping, begin neckline decreases. And it might say something like decrease at neckline edge every right side row, however many this is, 8 times. You're just going to write it out. Neckline, 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 neckline. So you know that if it's going to be every right side row, write it out on that same piece of paper. That way you can just clear your brain from all of that stuff and you have it all written out and it is absolutely perfect. Yes, that's what I like to do. Okay, and that will save you a lot of hassle because they just can't write it out, especially in patterns that are in books. They just don't have the space. Magazines or whatever, they just don't have the space to write it all out. Some patterns, I think those of us who learn to knit in the after the days of Ravelry, when you're downloading the pattern and they don't care how many pages it takes, they can give you a 12-page pattern. They can write the whole thing out for you. But most printed patterns are not going to have that level of detail on how to do it. So you have to know how to do that yourself, or at least know what they're talking about. Okay, so next. All right, this is the last thing that we're going to have to talk about is parentheses and asterisks. Okay, very confusing, I know. If you hate math, this is probably why. Looks to me a little bit like algebra where you have these parentheses. But basically, the things in the parentheses are what you're going to repeat however many times it tells you. So when there are parentheses and a number, they're saying that the stuff in the parentheses is what gets repeated, not 3 times. So this is very different from this. This means you have one knit one, and then you have 3 sets of this little lace pattern. It could also be written this way. So an asterisk is kind of like instead of a parenthesis. This, where the knit one is inside, is very different from that. Okay, so whatever is inside the parenthesis is going to be repeated however many times you need it. Okay, why do they use these anyway? Okay, why can't they just write it out? Well, I'll show you. Knit 1, yarn over knit 3 3 times, knit 2 together 3 times, knit 1, repeat to end. This is a lot, but it's just one line. And if you know how to read it, you then see that the stuff that's in the parentheses gets repeated the number of times right after the parentheses. There's a bracket around all of this stuff. So this gets repeated 3 times, then you do this stuff, then you go back and repeat everything again. I know that looks confusing, but imagine facing this instruction for a line, and this is only 5 repeats. So it's not only quicker to write and takes less space in your print pattern, it's also a lot less overwhelming, don't you think? I think that's a ton less overwhelming. Okay, so we did have one more question. So that's all I had prepared for you tonight, but we did have a question from Amelia with make 1 increases when there's no indication of which way they lean. Okay, so for me, a make 1 left is the default, which means that I am going to pick that running strand up front to back and knit into the back simply because that's easier for me. It might not be easier for you. It might be easier to do a make 1 right. And the truth is that if you're doing a single make 1 in isolation, as you might if you were doing some darts up the front or, a random increase in a lace pattern, if they're not right next to each other, they look so similar that it really doesn't matter. I truly believe that it doesn't matter. It has to do with which leg is a little more forward in the increase, but honestly, you can do either one, Amelia, and it doesn't matter at all. So we have a question. Let's see. Oh my gosh, how to read Japanese patterns. Oh my darling, I don't have any Japanese patterns, but I know that Japanese patterns are so wonderfully written. They are, I don't think they're written in Japanese. I think they're written in symbology, which is a universal language. Am I right on that? I could be wrong, but thank you for the compliment. That's so terribly sweet of you, and I really appreciate that. Um, if if this video has been helpful for you, please give it a thumbs up. Please give it a comment and go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I would love to share more stuff like this with you. It makes me so happy to help people understand patterns better, because more pattern understanding means more knitters making beautiful things, which is what I absolutely love. So thank you guys so much for joining me. And until next time, let's see, what is next time? Oh, I did have to reschedule my Rowan 73 preview. I was going to be doing that next week, but they shifted the launch date for Rowan until March 1st. So I'm still working on what I'm going to be doing next week. It might be an interview with someone fun. So keep your eyes peeled and stay tuned to the YouTube channel, because it will tell you what's coming up. Thank you guys so much for being with me, and I will see you next time. Good evening. Have a great one.